Introducing John Benson, who is Stereoscopic Supervisor at Illumination Entertainment. John has been with Illumination since 2009, and he's also worked in the past at Leica Studios and Weta Digital. With that, I will pass to John. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for the invitation to this, and I hope everybody finds it interesting. I'm going to place a bit of anaglyph material, so I hope people have anaglyph glasses. Just my typical workday, you can see from the picture, I usually wear anaglyph glasses to set the stereo on my workstation. Then I review with the polarized glasses, and of course I'm a bit older now, so I need the reading glasses to see things up close. So that picture there is sort of my natural everyday look. All right, so if people have anaglyph glasses, bear with me. I'm going to present some minion material off Despicable Me as a start. And yeah, it's just an introduction here, I guess. Here we go. So this was created at the end of Despicable Me as a just an epilogue, so we could play with the 3D. The producers really were excited about 3D and just wanted to have fun with it. And actually, they're calling me. I end up being the minion with the referee cap, measuring the distances. I put this in black and white anaglyph because the colors are pretty intense with the minion yellow. And the whole concept behind this was, what can we do to make this more 3D? It seemed to be really important to the producers to emphasize that this is going to be a 3D film. And there I go out of the cannon. All right. All right. So it's always a question about when your mom asks you what you do, or friends or whatever. I say I do stereo, and inevitably they say, so how do you work the sound? And it's all about the visuals, and it's hard to describe that stereo means the visuals. So I have to say, put on the glasses when you go to the theater. But pretty much the entire film is the stereo is defined from the beginning to the end by me. Sort of like an editor or the composer. And I have to say, after looking at some of the presentations, I'm not a scientist. I just set stereo. I define how it looks, how the shots cut together, what comes out of the screen, what's behind the screen. But I don't do any math. I don't do any calculations. I'm not going to have anything technical here for you guys, so I hope you weren't expecting anything technical. So on Despicable Me, the first rule, pretty much coming into this, was the producer called me on the plane as I'm about to head to France. All the production happens in Paris, France. And all I could really say is, I want you to make it funny. And I thought, that's such a weird thing to say, because 3D is, for me, it's about an emotion that you'll get when you're watching the film, the intensity. But to make it funny was a very, very strange request. And so throughout the films that we've done, this has sort of actually stuck with me as how to make it happen. Of course, when you're creating the 3D for a film, it's not obvious, except to actually do it. And it's really important that we do no harm to the audience. I don't want to break anybody's eyeballs, because I always get, going back to that first question, what do you do with the 3D? With stereo, what does that mean? Is I decide how it looks in 3D when you wear the glasses. And if you're wearing the glasses, you go to the movie and you're sitting there in the theater and you get the headache, because inevitably everybody says, I don't like 3D movies because I get a headache. I'm feeling like, okay, well, if you get a headache and you're watching one of my films, that's my fault. That's bad. And so I really find it very, very, very important to stick to this as well. Do no harm. I want people to see the movies again and really enjoy them for as long as they can. We use Nuke, Maya, and Python for the productions. I don't know if you're familiar with these, but Nuke is a compositing software. Maya is a 3D animation software, and Python, of course, is a scripting language. We try to use what we can out of them. I've asked the producers before, can I get a certain tool? And they always say no. So it's our objective when we're producing these films to do what we can out of the software and design the stereo in a way that doesn't require extra finesse that we can't do with the normal tools. Python has been fantastic for developing Python pipelines and getting to see the work that we do rendered properly. Just throw up some definitions here, and we'll probably come back to these. Every day we use these terms. The first one is the HIT. It's a horizontal image translation, and I'll show some information on this in a bit. That's just pushing the two rendered images against each other, and this pushes the image back or forward against the screen. Jaillissement. Because I work in Paris, we have this term, jaillissement, and it's the sticking out of the frame, the gushing of the image. I don't actually know what the technical term is in English. And again, I'm not a scientist, so everybody there was calling it jaillissement, and so I do too. So when I say something's coming out of the screen, I will say jaillissement. It has a lot of jaillissement, sort of a Franglish, I guess. ZP, or the Z-plane. This is where the image is at the screen. In Maya, we have a little box that defines where that is. And so I can always see what is at the screen and what's behind it and what's in front of it. Infinity, I'm using this kind of loose. It's the deepest part of the image. If the image is a close-up, say I'm just photographing a table, then infinity is the farthest object on the table, between the distance between the two eyes. Obviously, it would be the horizon if I was shooting a landscape. A floating window, we have the edge, the border of one eye, and I'll adjust that to match the border of the other eye. This is when something is in jaillissement and it's at the edge of the frame. And I'll show an example of that in a bit. And then a stereo script. Originally, for the first movies, I always had a stereo script, a predefined idea of how much stereo to apply per shot, and created a bit of a graph to see how that works. So, okay, so this is an example of a particular shot. If you're wearing the anaglyph glasses, you can see how the foreground object is coming into jaillissement. here. And what I'm drawing here is an example of the infinity. So for our productions, for all of our films, I always create an infinity of approximately -30 pixels. And you can see the adjustment here. So I line up the two background images with the hit, and it comes out to about -30 pixels. So that's now pushed everything forward to the screen that was at infinity. I try to keep that -30 pixels for all of our films because it ends up being about the width of our eyes at the screen in a normal theater. And if it goes beyond that, you end up with, you could go wall-eyed, which ends up being painful. And that goes against the main rule, do no harm. So let's see, I've reset the hit back to -30, so it's the normal rendered hit. You can see here in the foreground, this is in Jaissement. The foreground character, as we've panned, let's see, as we've come forward, she's going to be in Jaissement. And there's a bit of a trick here because when you come closer to an object with these virtual cameras and real cameras as well, what comes closer tends to feel more 3D, if I can say that. And so what happens to make this do no harm less painful is I adjust the stereo of the foreground objects separately from the background objects. In this particular case, I've separated the foreground and the middle ground and the far distant background. We also have a flare, which ends up being one of the tricky parts. So we'll come to that in a second. So to do some of this, dealing with objects that are close and far away at the same time, we actually have 3 cameras that we use. In this particular instance, I'm using a triple camera. And most of the time I just use a dual camera, 2 of the cameras out of the 3. We could have more, but it gets to be really heavy and complicated to separate all of the objects in a 3D scene. So what we have here, you can see we have our metadata. The metadata is showing that there's a hit of -30, and the foreground for the first camera is animating from -30 to -18. The IOC for the second camera, this middle ground, is animating from 1.8 to 4. And these are just Maya values. I'm not sure exactly what they mean, if they have any relative, because the whole scale of a Maya scene is arbitrary. And then the foreground camera, Miss Crawley, is 1.8 to -1 to 1.1. So she actually gets flatter as we go past her, and that helps to avoid the painful aspect of something super 3D feeling in the foreground. So this is an example in Maya of what I'm doing here. So you can see here, this is the Z-plane that I was describing earlier. And this is also a Z-plane. the Z-plane for Miss Crawley's camera and this middle ground camera are locked together because they're pretty close, and I don't want their distances to feel too separate at the beginning of the shot. But the stuff that's in the far distance, the house, I'm giving that more IOC, more depth, because we're making movies, and part of the deal is it's all magic. There's the even though it's far away, you have the potential for making something look small if you add more IOC between the objects. But the fact is, you want it to look rich. You want it to look developed. You want it to look interesting. So by adding a little extra IOC to that, it just takes the edge off it becoming a cardboard cutout. Especially when you've got to set the IOC to something that's very close, like Miss Crawley. Otherwise, you end up with something that's going to break your eyeballs. So what I did here is I set the camera to elements 2, and you can see the values for the intraocular and the hit are at this frame starting to change, starting to become a little flatter as I advance the camera. This isn't updating. There it goes. So this is an example if I said, oh, I'm not going to use 2 cameras. I'm just going to use everything. I'm going to put the whole shot into 1 camera. You can see Miss Crawley has offset. If she's got the same IOC as the background. It's just too much. It's too painful. Your eyes break. I've done harm. I'm fired. So that's set back to the original setting. And here you can see the 2 cameras are starting to separate. Obviously, Miss Crawley's camera isn't needed anymore. I don't care what it does. And the middle camera is just for these foreground bushes to give them more depth as well as we go through the scene. So I'll just touch on this. For Despicable Me and all of the first projects, Minions, Secret Life of Pets, we created something called a stereo script. And this was a very important thing, these stereo moments, because we felt like, oh, the audience needs to have these stereo moments to be entertained. So I created a stereo script with some of these catchphrases. Deep. This is fun. There's a shot in the Lorax where I saw in IMAX, and I was actually on the floor, not sitting in a seat, and I felt like I could walk right into the shot. It was really beautiful, dramatic, usually in a sequence to help build the depth. Part of what's going on here is you'll see in the script that you don't want to have everything crazy in a 3D movie because your eyes, being muscles, need to adjust. They need to work. And if you've got everything really deep and crazy all the time, it's going to make you very tired. I don't want to make you tired when you watch the movie. I want you to come out of the movie and not rub your eyes, but to say, wow, that was really great. You want to have the funny moments, trying to define some things that make funny. Things that just pop are always good, but it's humor is very objective. We also have VFX can create stereo moments, and then of course there's some psycho things you can do in 3D that just don't work in 2D, and they just make the 3D movie awesome. So this is an example of the stereo script that we did for, I think it's Despicable Me 2. And what you have is the beginning of the movie. These are all different sequences. And the amount of red is showing the intensity. And we sort of mapped it out so that you can look at the graph distance into the audience, that some of these moments would hit people in the back seat. So if you were sitting in the front seat, the 3D would feel like it's going, well, it never feels like it's going over your head, but for the person in the back seat, it would feel like it's going over the head of the person in the front seat, if that makes sense. So the top of the graph is showing how deep things are coming, the jaillissement, and the bottom part of the graph is showing how deep it is into the scene, this relative to the screen plane. So this is the first act. This is the second act, and there's a few stereo moments, the water cooler moments that we would say, but the overall average of the depth is sort of moderate. So at the beginning, I peak it up a little bit to get you grabbed, and then throughout Act 2, which is generally a lot of just simple storytelling, it's staying fairly moderate because, again, I don't want to wear your eyes out. And this is Act 3, where it's building and building until the very end, where you're just like bombarded with 3D moments. One of the things that you learn is it's always good to end the movie in a way that makes the audience walk out saying, wow. You never remember a movie that you didn't say wow at the end, or that had a really good ending. If it had a bad ending, you'll always forget the movie. So this is the point of building and making that crescendo at the end. So some of the, just a note on these scripts. So we did these scripts for the first movies, and then you'll notice that there's a lot of scenes here. I think probably by the time we finished the movie, most of these scenes were radically altered or thrown out or changed. And so it ended up being a lot of upfront work for a process that is, a filmmaking process is constantly evolving throughout production. And it just made sense to not just keep this script in mind as far as how we actually do the work. But to stick to something like this, it's really, you gotta work by the seat of your pants most of the time. So we stopped doing it because it consumed a lot of energy. But the idea is still there, and so we try to maintain that idea throughout all the films. Some of the things that we deal with a lot, visual effects and lens effects. Back to the anaglyph glasses. Here's an example from Sing 2, our newest movie. And the playback is pretty terrible, but I imagine it's probably terrible on other people's ends as well. So the point is not to have a good smooth flow, it's more to see the 3D. Let's get that playing. So oftentimes effects like water, they'll spray at the camera, and then I'm left going, what do I do with that? Because suddenly we've defined a lens. And part of my philosophy with the filmmaking is to not have a lens. I want you to be part of the scene. If you've got a lens, it turns you into more of a voyeur as opposed to a participant. And I think that's what makes good 3D personally is being able to participate in the film, because you're there, you're seeing part of the action as a participant. So when you have water hitting the lens, it takes away from that. If you have things hitting the lens, in 2D, on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense. You've got, you want to have those drops on the lens. It gives that sense of realism. So here at the end frame with anaglyph, you can see a lot of spots on the lens. We've got all of these spots here. with big water drops. But we decided to keep this as a 3D shot as opposed to making a mono shot, just because we'd never make it a mono in a 3D movie, but we just decided to leave it there because it's actually pretty far from the character and seemed to work for this particular shot. Many other shots, our request that all of these spots get removed so we don't feel that presence of the lens. Okay, one of the issues that we also deal with, image size and floating windows. So I just saw Sing 2 in the theater, and I did one of those things you're not supposed to. I took a picture of the movie, and I want you to notice where things are on this picture. The Buster's feet, Buster's the main character, the koala, his feet are being cropped, and on the far right side you can see just a sliver of a floating window. It's where the left and right images are overlapping, and hopefully you can see it. So here's the shot as we produced it and as we delivered it. You can see that Buster's feet exist. It's really disappointing to see this in the theater. I'm not sure what happens in the projection booth. They frame it up for HD, for instance, a 177 aspect ratio when we produced it for a 185 aspect ratio, or the projectionist is just sloppy. In this case, I felt like I was watching the whole movie blown up a little bit. What I want to demonstrate here is the floating window control. If you've got your anaglyph glasses, you can see here on the right side, I've adjusted the window. This usually happens in the DI, in the digital intermediate process as post, where we also do all of the color correction. So now I've lined up the window on one eye so it matches the other eye. If you're wearing the anaglyph glasses, it feels comfortable. Without it, it feels there's a little retinal rivalry, as we say. And so without the glasses, you can see the red area where it's bled over. This is sort of what we saw in the theater. And you can see it doesn't match. We've blown up the image. We've lost part of the floating window. In many cases, the floating window is much more subtle than that, and it's going to be completely gone. And so that's, I gotta say, this is part of an issue with projection, is the projectionists or the distributors are not enforcing framing. And it's very, very, very important to get the left and right framed as intended. Okay, I'll just run through these real quick. Mono versus stereo. Often we deliver two shots. So this is the mono version. Sorry, that was the stereo version. This is the mono version. So you can see that we've added much more flare. It was too much for stereo. So in the stereo version, we cut it back. Setting up shots, we've got a technique where in layout, I'll define everything on the screen. I'll write a value, the hit value, and I'll just draw on the frame where I want the Z-plane to be. Any notes I add, the layout artist looks at this and just sets the Z-plane to the marks that I tell them to. This is a very fun sequence. In this case, I've added the hit, so it's increasing from shot to shot. So on this shot, it's actually 24, not 30, as it was reset afterwards. And then it's building up to minus 40. And so I'm increasing the intensity of that stereo. So this being a very dramatic moment makes this, the wolf character, really exciting. And this is an example of how we're setting those values. So it's at minus 24, and I'll adjust the interocular distance here. And that puts it about at the floor where I wanted it. And so once that's done, the layout artist saves the scene, and it goes through the rest of production with these values until we decide to polish it later. I guess we don't have time for this. If you've got the anaglyph glasses, you can see this. If you don't, it's probably going to be impossible. It's not long vocals, it's long focals. So long focals are another aspect of what makes things really difficult in production. We like to use these long focal lenses. And yeah, okay, so from one shot to the next, we've got a very long focal, a 50. And then I did a stereo tweak to adjust the nose, because with the original setting, it just felt flat. And so this character felt like a cardboard cutout. So by adjusting with the dual camera a different stereo setting on the character here, I can pop the nose out. And so she feels just a little richer. I'm just putting this in here. The only real trick is we have to look at every single image for the film. There's no shortcuts. It's all looking at the image and making sure that it doesn't hurt anybody and it feels good. So Sing 2 is out in theaters in 3D right now. If you got kids, I'm sure you'll be watching this movie for a long time. Unfortunately, it's the 3D presentations finished in my area, so we just managed to see it in a theater that was rather far away, but I find it really tragic that the 3D presentations are not getting the respect it deserves these days, but try to see it in 3D if you can. It's turned out really great, I think.